Cluster 1 of the local questionnaire assesses tenure security from a rights holder perspective. The national questionnaire looked more at legal safeguards, but this local questionnaire can be used to document the tenure situation of individuals or groups of people interviewed. The term legitimate tenure rights is used frequently here, and it was the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure that you see here on the screen which coined this term to underscore the need to consider both legally recognized and also customary or informal tenure rights as legitimate. Hence, different types of tenure rights can be legitimate, from full-fledged legal ownership to possession, use and access rights, whether formal or informal. And this is really important because often the most vulnerable to violations of their legitimate tenure rights do not enjoy legal or formal recognition of their rights, or they don't have a legal status that provides sufficient protection of their tenure rights. This could apply to women, to indigenous peoples, or customary tenure rights holders in many contexts. The term legal personality is used in the questionnaire. In law, a legal person is any person or thing that can do the things a human person is usually able to do in law, such as enter into contracts, register and own property. In the case of individuals, legal personality would typically just be citizenship proved by an ID card. But for groups, it could be a group registered as a legal entity. It could be, for example, a cooperative, an association, or a community that is registered as a legal person. This cluster has a strong focus on security of tenure rights, and it's measured in the questionnaire both as perception of tenure security, but also documentation, whether a person or a community holds legally recognized documentation of their tenure rights. It's important to emphasize that states have an obligation to ensure tenure security, and this is because legal security of tenure has been considered a core aspect of the right to adequate housing, which is a binding right enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which has been ratified by most states in the world. Access to land and natural resources is essential for the realization of a number of human rights. It's not just a component of the right to adequate housing, but also essential for the realization of adequate food, because it's used for food production, of the right to water, health, a healthy environment, cultural rights, and many more rights. The links between the economic, social and cultural rights and access to land and natural resources has been clarified by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The rights in the International Covenant are binding on states, and most states in the world have actually ratified the Covenant. It is also important to note that there are specific rights to land and natural resources for indigenous peoples and for rural communities. The binding ILO Convention 169 enshrines these rights for indigenous peoples, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as well, and then fairly recently the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas extended these land and natural resource rights to a much larger group of communities working and living in rural areas. In the online version of the local questionnaire, I'll click on the first cluster, Protection of Legitimate Tenure Rights. Please make sure you add some descriptions in the comment fields, especially for questions that seek to document incidences of conflicts over land or restrictions on land use. Besides ticking the boxes, then please describe the case in the comment fields, which will make it much more useful for others to understand what the case is about.